Connie Converse is likely not a name that a lot of us are familiar with. A gifted musician, she moved to New York City as a young adult and eventually began writing and performing in the 1950s. Although she never truly rose to prominence, she is highly regarded in the music world and credited as the earliest performer in the singer-songwriter genre. But it's possible Connie is not even aware of how much her songs mean to some people, as she vanished one day in 1974, never to be seen again. But first, I'd like to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring today's episode. Your mental health is not something to be taken lightly. Whether you've experienced something traumatic or it's something you're dealing with long term, we all need support sometimes, but it's not always the easiest thing to access. There are often long waits to even get to speak to a therapist, which isn't exactly ideal when you have a mental health crisis. BetterHelp is one of the world's largest therapy services, with over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who cover a wide range of issues. All you need to do to get started is answer a few questions about what you want from therapy, and BetterHelp will match you with the right therapist for you. If you find for any reason that your therapist isn't quite the right match, you can always switch to another free of charge. Once connected with your therapist, you can communicate with them however you want, whether that's by call, video, or message. You can message your therapist at any time and set up live sessions when it's most convenient for you. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/coldcasedetective. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com. It's also linked below in the description. And now let's dive in with today's mysteries. Elizabeth Eaton Converse was born on August 3, 1924, in Laconia, New Hampshire, but spent much of her early life in the state's capital of Concord. The middle of three children, Connie had two brothers, Paul, 3 years older, and Philip, 5 years younger. The children were raised in a strict Baptist family, where the father was a minister and her mother was described as musical and a homemaker. At some point after their move to Concord, however, Connie's father left the church to direct the state chapter of the Anti-Saloon League, the lobbying organization that aimed to maintain prohibition. Although her upbringing was firmly rooted in religion and her parents were inflexible about their beliefs, Connie and the others appeared to have a content childhood. They often read Shakespeare as a family, dividing the parts amongst themselves. Philip would later credit his sister for raising him. In an essay about his older sibling, which he wrote in 2000, he recalled, "I always wince at mentioning this truth, because it sounds as though our mutual parents were on leave for that decade or two. In fact, they were very much there and loving, but I did spend more of the time that was psychologically real to me under Sis's thrall." Connie, Philip stated, always had a creative flair. He remembered the time that she painted a life-size Robin Hood portrait on the sewing room wall, complete with a Sherwood Forest backdrop. He noted, "At the time, I had no idea other little boys weren't a tenth as lucky as me." Connie would use the painted wall as the background for the performances she put on for her siblings. Not only was she creatively talented, but Connie had a thirst for knowledge. She was known to memorize poetry and read about politicians, explorers, and other prominent figures throughout history. As a teenager, Connie attended Concord High School, where she excelled. She was a valedictorian and won 8 academic awards, including a scholarship for the Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. Connie attended following family tradition. Both her mother and grandmother had graduated from the university. However, Connie dropped out after 2 years and moved to New York City, where she shed her birth name, Elizabeth, and adopted the name Connie, a nickname bestowed upon her by her new friends. Connie's aim for a musical career, and the fact that she'd abandoned school for it, came as quite a shock to those who knew her. She hadn't touched a musical instrument since she'd given up violin lessons in middle school, and her abrupt decision left her parents devastated. Philip stated, "I think they assumed she was running away from them, and my guess is that maybe they were right." He called her actions an act of pure rebellion. During the 1950s, Connie worked firstly in an editorial position at the Institute for Pacific Studies before moving on to the Academy Photo Offset Printing House when the organization she was initially working for collapsed. She spent time living in Greenwich Village, Hell's Kitchen, and Harlem, and began using her free time to write music and perform for friends, playing the guitar as she sang. During this time, Connie also began drinking and smoking, which went against her firm religious upbringing. Her parents reportedly dismissed her music career, with her father never hearing her sing before his death. They appeared to have no interest in their daughter's new life, and it has been speculated her parents rejected her choices as she was going against the way she was raised. In 1954, Connie made her first and only known public performance when she appeared on CBS's The Morning Show. It had been set up with the help of Gene Deitch, a comic artist and World War II veteran with a tape recorder, which he used to record many of Connie's tracks. He was enamored with her music and supported her career. Writing to a journalist for The Awl, Deitch stated, "There were many better singers than Connie, but there were few as intelligent or literate or beautiful. Her songs still haunt me." 2 years later, Connie recorded an album for her younger brother, Philip, which she titled Musics Volumes 1 and 2, and by 1961, she had grown frustrated trying to sell her music as she struggled to find success. That same year, Bob Dylan moved to Greenwich Village and soon skyrocketed to fame, releasing his first album in 1962 after he signed with Columbia Records. Potentially disillusioned with New York and her dream, Connie subsequently left the state, moving in with Philip, who was residing in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Today, some journalists and fans dub Connie as a woman who was ahead of her time, but as her male counterparts found success in the same genre, it seems possible that her gender or lack of connections in the industry contributed to what she saw as her failure. She was not political, not with her looks nor her music, which led her to be seen as an oddity. She was not glamorous either. During a period of time where women were supposed to look put together at all times, Connie would rock up to music venues with no makeup, long, shapeless dresses, and a practical bun. Gene Deitch claimed that producers and managers in the industry considered her too hard to sell. By all accounts, in the years leading up to her disappearance, Connie lived an uneventful life. She took a job as a secretary, then became a writer and managing editor for the Journal of Conflict Resolution in 1963. The journal was a bi-monthly academic one, covering international conflict and conflict resolution research, and Connie seemed deeply interested and involved in her work. During the 60s, she generally stopped writing and performing music. Philip recalled that once she left New York, she appeared to accept the fact she would never make it as a musician, and this greatly bothered her. Much of the mystery surrounding Connie comes down to the fact she was an incredibly private individual. When asked questions about her personal life, her answers were short and abrupt, often brief yes or no responses. Philip considered it possible that his sister was struggling with her sexuality, that she was a lesbian, something that was perhaps hard to reconcile with her deeply religious upbringing. But her nephew, Tim, has noted there is no evidence that would even indicate she was ever in any romantic relationships. Interestingly, several of Connie's songs appear to discuss love, unrequited love, sadness, and loneliness. One of her tracks, We Lived Alone, which can be found on YouTube, generally talks about how she seemed content living alone until she met someone, with the lyrics stating, "I had a job, my wants were few, they were until I wanted you." During her time in Michigan, Connie became heavily reliant on smoking and drinking. By 1973, she was described as burnt out and depressed. She had ceased contact with her friends in New York. Towards the end of 1972, the Journal of Conflict Resolution left the University of Michigan, where it had previously been housed, after it was acquired by Yale in Connecticut. This decision greatly upset Connie, who was forced to leave her position, and in response, her friends and colleagues came together to fund an 8-month-long trip to England, which they hoped would improve her mood. She appeared bored by ordinary working life and miserable over it, and her friends hoped the fresh scenery in one of the UK's most striking cities would breathe new life into her and help her become inspired again. Connie reportedly enjoyed living in London, as she had never visited Europe before, but she was no different upon her return to the US. After she flew home, Connie, now 48, grudgingly agreed to join her mother on a trip to Alaska. She was uninterested in the trip, telling her brother she wanted to go to Alaska like I want to go to the basement. But she accepted the invitation because she reportedly found it hard to say no. Philip has suggested that the trip may have been truly what pushed his sister over the edge. Their mother began planning another mother-daughter trip as soon as they got home, and to make matters worse, the 48-year-old had just learned she needed a hysterectomy, which took a toll on her emotional well-being. In the summer of 1974, Connie finally made the decision to leave Ann Arbor. Shortly before her 50th birthday, she penned letters to her family and friends, telling them she was going to go and attempt to make a new life for herself somewhere else. She then packed up in her tiny Volkswagen Beetle and left the city. In one of her letters, she wrote, "Human society fascinates me and awes me and fills me with grief and joy. I just can't find my place to plug into it." She also wrote, "I've watched the elegant, energetic people of Ann Arbor, those I know and those I don't, going about their daily business on the streets and in the buildings, and I felt a detached admiration for their energy and elegance. If I ever was a member of this species, perhaps it was a social accident that has now been cancelled." And in a separate letter, she added, "Let me go. Let me be if I can. Let me not be if I can't." Connie has never been seen or heard from since she vanished in 1974. In one of her letters to Philip, she included a check and asked that he make sure her health insurance was paid for and in good standing for a period of time following her leaving. However, she requested that he stop paying for it on a certain date. Connie was expected to go on an annual family trip to a lake, but she was already gone, her letters dispatched, by the time the trip came around. A few years after she left, someone told Philip that an Elizabeth Converse was listed in a Kansas City or Oklahoma phone book. He can't quite remember which. He never looked into the matter further though, stating, "Leaving was her choice, and I would be embarrassed to show up on her doorstep and say, 'Hey, what's going on?' I know it might sound ghastly, but that's how I felt." Philip also remembered one particular memory from when he was about 11, when one of Connie's friends took her own life. The community of Concord, he recalled, had been angry and upset at the victim, but Connie had not been. I remember her saying that the decision to take one's own life was very personal. She very much believed, even back then, that if anything should be left up to a person, it was whether or not to live. For some time, Philip suspected that Connie had taken her own life by driving her vehicle into a body of water, either in Michigan or North Dakota, after her departure. About a decade after she vanished, the family tried to hire a private investigator to at least determine if Connie was alive or dead, but he declined, stating that if she was alive, it was her right to disappear, and he couldn't force her to return home. In March of 2009, Loud Direct Recordings released the album How Sad, How Lovely, containing 17 of Connie's songs. Prior to this, much of her music had been lost. Interest in recovering her tracks was sparked when Gene Deitch, 80 at the time, appeared on the radio show Spinning on Air in 2004, where he played some of Connie's recordings. In the years since, 2 albums were produced, which contained recordings of other artists performing music that Connie had written and never recorded. In 2020, an EP named Sad Lady was released, featuring 6 of Connie's recordings. Her music is available to purchase on Bandcamp. Connie's brothers and parents are now deceased, and if she herself is still alive, she will be 99 years old. It seems unlikely we will ever discover what happened to the musician, but all the same, her story is equal parts chilling and tragic, as so much of Connie and her life is shrouded in mystery. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own theories and speculations, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.